Well, kind of the million-dollar question is, if there's a viewer out there that's sort of not really knowing about, been out clay shooting, but not really knowing anything about game shooting, how would you recommend them to get into game shooting?
Oh, I think coming to a gun club like this would be absolutely superb, because unless you've been lucky enough to have been brought up in the tradition of shooting by your father or in a family shoot, where safety has been installed in you, I think it's really important that you come to somewhere like this lovely shooting ground and learn all the safety and the etiquette and how to behave and how to carry your gun and remember it's unbroken at the end of each drive and all the safety features you need to know. And I think this would be ideal, because if you just turned up at a game shoot and you were just a clay shot, I think you might embarrass yourself and maybe not as safe as you should be. So I think it's vital you came here.
And what sort of game shoot would you recommend me to go on? Would you recommend me going to sort of somewhere like real upmarket like Hatfield House or something like that? Or would you recommend me going to a box on 150, 200 per day?
Yeah, I would start in a small shoot and even share a gun with someone. Lots of syndicates offer half guns. So instead of shooting the 6 days of the season, you might just shoot half. Or you can go with your dog and share halfway through the day. But there's plenty of ways of approaching this sport without breaking the bank.
That's a great way to say, that's a great way about sharing the gun, because a lot of people, they come in, they go, especially to like a sporting agent, they go to a sporting agent and they're really expensive. You go and see this day's game shooting and they give you a bill of like £700, £800, £900 and you think, wow, that's expensive. But as you said, if you can share it,
Yep.
£300-400 to start.
Yep.
So, I mean, how would you go on for that?
And a mixed day, you might have thrown into the day's shooting, you might have some pigeon shooting as well as pheasant, or there might be partridge on the shoot, so you can have a good mixed day. Probably when you first start, you shouldn't go for ground game just from the safety aspect until you're confident that you've got gun control and it's in your head completely where you should swing and shouldn't swing. But a good mixed family day somewhere would be great.
And when you're on the game day, 90% of game shooting, and I prefer it, they say no ground game. And people think, oh, why no ground game? Because obviously if you shoot a fox or you shoot a rabbit, they go and have a go at it. Why is it good to have no ground game?
Well, I think certainly when you're talking about foxes, they are vermin and they do need controlling, but you've got to be an extremely good shot and you've got to be very close. And also there is the danger factor, someone gets overexcited and they take their gun and swing through the standing gun beside them. So I think it's a very good rule. Most shoots, unless they're very experienced guns, don't shoot ground game, particularly when they're standing.
Okay, and anything else can you give kind of the viewer or tell me about sort of a day's game shoot, or how you should prepare yourself for a day's game shooting?
Just make sure you have the right clothing, the right wellies, the right tweeds and shooting clothing, so you're fully catered. And make sure you take a mixture of clothing because you're not sure what weather you're going to find, so you would want a waistcoat probably and your outer jacket, because as you say, frequently you'll want to take that off to shoot in to get the movement, and you're not sure whether you're going to come across. Obviously take your tip money for your keeper, and just make sure you have a really good day. And half the fun is the banter you have with your friends. If you miss a bird, half the fun is having the jokes and the laughter about it afterwards.
So we've got this big coat. It's huge. I am 25 degrees and I am sweltering in this. But why is it good to have a coat? I mean, I always like it. You've got so many different pockets. You've got the big pockets. You've got this to hold.
Yeah, the cartridge retaining. Yeah, hold the flap up.
A few little tips about why this coat is so important.
You could be shooting in a really snowy, blizzardy, really wet day. So in your coat, you have hand warmer pockets to keep your hands warm, because it's important. You might have not brought gloves with you, so you want your trigger fingers to be warm. So you've got hand warmers to take your hands out of the weather. You have big volume pockets to contain cartridges, and they also have a flap so that when you can load very quickly by retrieving the cartridges from the pocket with the flap open. You've got what's known as a raglan sleeve, so your shoulder's got a huge amount of movement in. Obviously, when you're swinging a gun, you don't want your coat to jump up in the air and have an air gap. So that's why you've got so much movement. That's why the sleeves look a bit baggy. It's to give movement.
And I always, when I teach somebody, I always take, so you've got your earphones, which is the safety bit. You've obviously got your glasses on. So the earphones around that. I always teach people to, when they get to their pegs, to take the coat off. So when you get to the peg, you put the coat on your peg.
Yep.
Like that. And so you put your earphones on there. You've got the big pockets.
Absolutely, with a cutaway so you can reach in very easily to get your cartridges.
And then you're free. You can mount that gun and you're free to have it. It's a lot better. You've got no collar there. And to be fair, these tweed garments sell all year round. They don't just sell in the game season.
No, indeed. And also, I mean, obviously, you might be very lucky, if you're very lucky to be invited grouse shooting. You could be walking somewhere on a hot day, but you might get a shower. And so the main thing is to keep your inner body warm. It doesn't really matter if your sleeves get wet, but if your inner body's warm and dry, that's great. So they're very practical.
And one last thing before we have a shot, before we see if this can hold up with the shooting, or whether it's you and I can shoot.
Yeah, well, I think that could be very interesting.
The game season, it's only certain times of the year. When is the game season? When does it start? When does grouse start? When does partridge start? What can you shoot? What time of year? When does it all finish?
Well, grouse starts on the 12th of August. I think most people know that date, even if they're not shooters. And grouse finish in December. Pheasants tend to start mid-October, but most shoots like to shoot when the leaves are off the trees. And they finish at end of January. And partridge are 1st of September to the end of January as well.
And then you've got things like woodcock.
Yep.
I mean, I always find woodcock is one of the best birds to eat. It is a fabulous bird to eat, but they're a very small bird, and I think they start in sort of October time as well.
Yes.
Same sort of thing as
And they finish January, I think, as well.
And grouse shooting. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to go grouse shooting. I always say that grouse is one of those things that you have to do before you die. Everyone has to do it. Why is it so good, and why is it so expensive?
It's the most exciting sport. It's all done on natural birds, so there's a huge amount of work to keep the population up. Some years the spring's really bad, so there's not a good hatch of young birds. So it's crucial, the management of them all, looking after. Tick and worm are a big problem in grouse, so the moor has got to be very well managed. So a big grouse moor has to employ a lot of keepers to maintain its numbers. But I think it's so exciting because you're standing in a butt, nothing happens for quite a long time. You can see the beaters miles away, and suddenly these guided missiles are coming over you at really high speed. And there's a big covey, and you think, oh, I'll just let rip into one of those, one will drop. Oh no, you have to pick your bird. You have to pick your bird. It's very, very exciting.
And if grouse shooting suddenly wasn't there, because obviously there's a lot of sort of hee-haw say about it, what do you think it would do for the whole economy, really?
Well, I don't know the figures because I'm from Scotland, but I believe in Scotland it's worth 30 million a year. And they're already looking at perhaps licensing it and putting their oar in, but they really do not understand what they're dealing with. It's a very important to the Scottish economy and employs a huge amount of people locally.
So if there's anyone out there that doesn't really understand about grouse shooting, game shooting, the best thing to do is give us an email, one of you and I an email, and we will answer that question.
Absolutely.